fired 2 shots. One shot hit Billy just above the heart, killing him instantly. As soon as the kid's body hit the floor, his legend began to grow and continues to grow to this day.
Somehow we made a legend out of the kid, and he's become this epitome of all that's good, and you know, he's the rebel against the establishment. Well, that's interesting, since he was a petty thief stealing horses outside of a whorehouse, or he stole laundry when he got his start, or a keg of butter, or the various things that we know to be true about the kid. Now, you can still make him into the symbol, but you've got to kind of shove some of this stuff under the rug and ignore it and say, well, that's not important. You know, all that's important is that he was the leader at the battle at the McSween house, and it was a fight of right against wrong.
Billy was very charming, and you know, we've all known somebody like Billy. You know, they're very charming, and you forgive a lot for what they do. At the same time, you know, he was loved here in Lincoln. The very fact that Lew Wallace commented in one of his letters back east that the kid was being serenaded in his jail in Casa Patron, and the meaning of that seemed to elude Wallace, but I mean, that tells me that the people of Lincoln loved Billy. And I think it was just because of his charm. I think he went out of his way to be nice to people and friendly, and people appreciated it.
I think that's the attraction to the kid, is the fact that he was just a boy, and when you're reading the story, even if you're 60 years old, the little boy in you is rooting for him. And the fact that a young man, barely 18 years old, would be dealing with killers twice his age and could stand toe-to-toe with them, that's the appeal.
I have more occasions to run into kids who have put this guy on a level that you wouldn't imagine an individual with that type of reputation could possibly be on. Yet it's there, and it's they identify with him. Now, that's very interesting because of what I think is going on in our society now, and the violence that's in our society right now, that this is attractive. It kind of worries me at the same time.
I think Billy the Kid's legends lived on so long because he was so young. When all of this occurred, he seemed to have no compunction about killing, about being good or about being bad. Apparently he wasn't the only one. Lots of men did the same thing, but they were older. He came along as a young man, a big child, and built his reputation practically from the time he was, what, about 12?
One time he's a Robin Hood, and the next time he's one of the most brutal killers ever was. It kind of goes on with generations as they want to see it. But at this point, I think the legend's very much alive.
The kid is fascinating because it's essentially a piece of clay that you can fashion into whatever you particularly want to. And by that process I mentioned earlier of kind of sweeping under the rug whatever facts don't particularly fit whatever you want to make the kid into, you do that and then fashion your own kid. And by doing that, he can be the antithesis of what is good, or he can be what's good and holy and fighting for right and justice, as we said before, against the powers of evil, the rebel against the establishment. Or he can be the forces of chaos against the forces of order. It all depends on what you want to emphasize and what you want to ignore. In actuality, the answer is somewhere in between there. The kid is really neither of those things. He's a much more complex real-life individual who has at least 2 sides and probably really multiple faces.
Up close, deadly. And one thing about this guy, cool under fire. For his age, 18 years old during the Lincoln County War, it's a phenomenal story.
You'd think I was a Republican, what I'm going to say about that, but the way I see it, when you listen to a politician or a reporter or a historian in particular, what they say, it doesn't, and probably isn't the truth, but because of their authority, they can sell the idea, and I think that's what's built Billy the Kid up. He had nothing to do with it. It's just history and reporters and that kind of stuff. That's all there is to it.
After the war, James Dolan took possession of the Tunstall store and the Rio Feliz Ranch. He built this home in Lincoln directly across the street from the store. Like his mentor, L.G. Murphy, who died in 1878, Dolan became a heavy drinker. Perhaps memories of the war haunted him. Dolan also built this home on the Rio Feliz Ranch that had once belonged to John Tunstall. It was here James J. Dolan would die at age 49 in 1898. Ironically, Dolan had become one of Lincoln's leading citizens, and in 1895, the governor of New Mexico asked him to write a report on the conditions in Lincoln County. Given Dolan's pivotal role in the Bloody War, his reply to the governor was the epitome of irony.
There is little, if any, rowdyism in Lincoln County. Our people respect the law and obey its mandates. In truth, there is not a county in New Mexico freer from internal disturbance than in Lincoln. James J. Dolan, Lincoln County, New Mexico, 1895.
Of the regulators, Fred Waite, Doc Scurlock, Frank Coe, George Coe, and Eno Salazar went on to lead normal and productive lives. Susan McSween, the widow of Alexander McSween, remarried in 1880, and starting with some cattle John Chisholm gave her as a gift, she went on to become the Cattle Queen of New Mexico. Always a feisty, outspoken woman, Susan had actually marched out into the street to argue with Colonel Nathan Dudley on the day she lost her home and her husband. Eventually, she settled in White Oaks, New Mexico, where she died at age 89 in 1931. In the almost 3 decades left to him after gunning down Billy the Kid, Pat Garrett became a legendary figure. Together with a man named Ashman Upson, Garrett wrote a book about the Kid's life. The first half of this book, penned by Upson, is mostly the work of his fertile imagination, almost all of it untrue. The second half, done by Garrett, is more factual and has shed some light on the Kid's life. Ironically, Garrett, one of the West's legendary lawmen, was killed in 1908. The later years of Garrett's life and his killing are still the subject of much controversy.
I expect everybody has their version of the Pat Garrett killing, and our version was that expressed by Wayne Brazel, who was a cowboy who worked here, easygoing fella. Wayne had some livestock dealings with Sheriff Garrett. Apparently there were some hard feelings about that. But Wayne's story was he went to town, he met Garrett. They had words. Garrett said, "We'll settle that right now," or words to that effect. And with that, he reached down to get his shotgun, which was on the floor of the buggy behind his feet. And when he did, Wayne shot him right in the back of the head with his pistol as he bent over.
William Gallagher, a college student in 1908, witnessed the Garrett killing. His daughter, Ann, relates her father's story.
My dad was going to school at New Mexico A&M at that time, and he was in mechanical engineering, and they had an engineering class, and they were surveying up on the mountain. And they had taken a rest period, and they were sitting on some rocks, and they watched this wagon coming along, going towards town, and in a little bit, this rider rode up, and they got to arguing. And apparently Pat Garrett got out of the wagon, was talking to the rider, and he turned. And when he turned back, he had a gun in his hand. And the rider shot him. He rode up to these boys. There were several of them sitting there on this rock, and he said, "Do any of you ride a horse?" And they said yes. And he picked this Mexican boy, and he said, "You ride to town and get the sheriff." And he said that's what happened. And really, they didn't know who it was when they were watching them, other than they did see him get shot.
As memories of the Lincoln County War faded, and with the coming of the railroad, which took the main business and commerce of the county elsewhere, the town of Lincoln almost ceased to exist. At one time, the county seat and its center of activity, Lincoln fell into disrepair, a town that seemed to have outlived its era. But in the late 1920s, after Walter Noble Burns wrote a best-selling book about Billy the Kid and the war, there was a renewed interest in Lincoln, and the town's fortunes were revived. Today, Lincoln, New Mexico is a destination for thousands of tourists who come here to relive history and to journey back in time to an era when the West